They told you Rome was the pinnacle of ancient civilization. They said it invented law, engineering, governance, that it stood alone as the beacon of order in a world of chaos. But what if I told you there was another empire, born in Africa, built on black stone and divine kingship, that rivaled Rome in every way and surpassed it in vision? What if this empire had gold before Rome minted its first coin? What if it governed millions without slavery as the backbone of its economy? What if it worshipped the same god as Rome decades before Constantine ever saw a vision in the sky? And what if the reason you've never heard of it isn't because it failed, but because someone didn't want you to know it succeeded? This isn't speculation. This is history. Buried, erased, denied. Welcome to the story of Kush, not as a footnote beneath Egypt, not as a derivative culture, but as a superpower in its own right. An African empire that didn't just survive. Rome, it outlasted it, outthought it, and ruled with a sophistication so advanced even modern archaeologists are still catching up. So why don't we teach this in schools? Why does your textbook reduce Kush to the land of dark-skinned archers? And who benefits from keeping this truth underground? Let's go back not to Rome, but to Napata, to Meroë, to the banks of the Nile, where black pharaohs once ruled. An empire stretching from Khartoum to the Mediterranean, because the real question isn't whether Kush was greater than Rome. It's why we've been lied to for centuries about what greatness even means. Rise of a Nile giant when Kush became an EMP were long before Roman senators debated in marble halls. Long before Caesar crossed the Rubicon, kingdom of Kush stood tall along the Upper Nile, a sovereign power with its own gods, language, and imperial ambitions, founded around 1070 BCE. After the collapse of New Kingdom Egypt, Kush didn't emerge from nothing. It rose from the ashes, but not as a copycat. As a successor, while Egypt fractured into regional warlordism, Kush consolidated. From its capital at Napata, near the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal, it forged a state rooted in spiritual authority and military precision. By 760 BCE, under King Pi, Kushite armies marched north, not as invaders, but as restorers. They saw themselves as the true heirs of pharaonic tradition. It was called by Ammon to purify a corrupted Egypt, and they did. Pi's victory, steely discovered at Gebel Barkal and now housed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, doesn't read like a conqueror's boast. It reads like a divine mandate. Asterisk, he didn't sack cities, spared them, offered mercy, demanded piety. When he finally defeated Tefnekht, the rebel ruler of Sazi Pi didn't execute him. He made him swear loyalty, then let him rule under Kushite oversight. Compare that to Rome's treatment of Carthage, salted earth, slaved population, erased identity. Which empire truly believed in order? Which one believed only in domination? For nearly a century, 5 Kushite kings, Pi, Shabaka, Shabetku, Taharka, and Tantamani ruled over a united Egypt-Nubia, realm from the Delta to the Fourth Cataract. They weren't Nubian interlopers. They were pharaohs crowned in Thebes, buried in pyramid fields, depicted in full royal regalia. Taharka, perhaps the greatest of them all, rebuilt temples across Egypt, including Karnak. He expanded irrigation systems, promoted art, and positioned Kush as the cultural heart of the Nile Valley. Yet look at any mainstream timeline of ancient Egypt, and these rulers are either footnoted or dismissed as foreign us purse. Why? Because acknowledging that black African kings ruled Egypt at its last golden age shatters the myth that civilization flowed only from north to south, from Greece to Rome to Europe. But here's the uncomfortable truth. At the height of their power, the Kushite pharaohs controlled more territory, commanded greater religious legitimacy, and maintained longer dynastic stability than early Rome ever did. Rome in 700 BCE was still a collection of hilltop villages fighting Etruscans. Kush was already an empire. So when did Rome become great? And who gets to decide? The fall in the Erebir THN 671 BCE, everything changed. The Assyrians came with iron weapons, battering rams, and imperial fury. They pushed south, sacking Memphis, threatening Thebes. Taharka fought valiantly, repelling them once, twice, but ultimately could not stop the tide of Mesopotamian conquest. Egypt fell. The Kushite dynasty retreated south, but here's what most histories omit. Kush didn't collapse. It evolved. While Egypt became a playground for Persians, Greeks, and Romans, Kush relocated its capital to Meroë, further inland, beyond the reach of northern invaders. And in Meroë, something extraordinary happened. Between 590 BCE and 350 CE, the kingdom of Kush entered its true golden age, not as an Egyptian echo, but as an independent African powerhouse. Archaeologist Dr. Laszlo Torak, author of The Image of the Ordered World in Ancient Nubian Art, writes Meroitic Kush developed a unique synthesis of indigenous African traditions and selective borrowings. From Egypt and the Hellenistic world, its political system, religion, and material culture were distinctly original. And yet, how many documentaries show Kushite pyramids and say, oh, they copied Egypt? How many textbooks skip Meroë entirely? Let's ask harder questions. If Kush merely copied Egypt, why did it develop its own alphabet? The Meroitic script, one of the earliest writing systems in sub-Saharan Africa. Why did it build over 200 pyramids more than Egypt, but design them taller, steeper, and with distinctive chapels attached? Why did its queens wield unprecedented power ruling as Kandakes, warrior monarchs who led armies into battle? One name stands above all, Amanirenas, in 24 BCE. When Rome, now an empire, sent forces to annex Kush under Emperor Augustus, she didn't send diplomats, she sent war. Roman historian Strabo, not exactly friendly to African resistance, recorded what happened next. Asterisk. Think about that. A black African queen, one-eyed, fearless, commanding tens of thousands against the might of Rome. Her forces ambushed Roman garrisons, destroyed statues of Augustus, and captured prisoners. Eventually, Rome sued for peace. Not conquest, peace, and not on Roman terms, but on Kushite ones. The final treaty. Rome agreed to waive taxes on Kush and recognize its sovereignty. No other African state forced such a concession from Rome. Carthage destroyed, Numidia divided, Mauritania annexed. But Kush negotiated as equals. So again, who was really greater? An empire that crushed others, or one that made Rome kneel? Asterisk, economy of power, gold, steel, and innovation. Asterisk. Now let's talk about wealth. Rome prided itself on its gold aureus, its vast trade networks, its granaries feeding millions. But where did Rome get much of its gold? Africa, and specifically Kush. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BCE, described Meroë as asterisk a city surpassing all others in wealth and splendor. Rich in gold mines, skilled in ironworking, and famed for its textiles and perfumes. Asterisk gold wasn't just mined, it was refined, traded, used in diplomacy. But even more shocking, iron. While Rome relied on imported metal and limited smelting, Kush mastered industrial-scale iron production centuries earlier. Excavations at Meroë have uncovered over 80 slag heaps, waste byproducts of iron smelting, some weighing hundreds of tons, cast iron, in Africa. 2,000 years ago, meanwhile, Rome was still forging wrought iron. So why don't we call Kush the birthplace of the Iron Age? Why do we credit China and Anatolia but erase Meroë? Could it be that a black African civilization mastering metallurgy challenges to many assumptions? Let's follow the trade routes from Meroë. Caravans carried gold to Alexandria Very, to Arabia Boni, to Persia yarn tools, to West Africa perfumed oils. India Greek and Roman merchants visited regularly. Pliny the Elder complained that African goods were flooding Roman markets, driving down prices. Asterisk wait, freedom, women rulers, no slavery. That sounds nothing like Rome. In Rome, 1/3 of the population were slaves. In Kush, no evidence of institutional slavery has ever been found. Instead, labor was organized through kinship, guilds, and state projects, not chains. So which society was truly civilized? One built on human bondage, or one that elevated human dignity? If Kush had no slavery, advanced industry, and female curlership, why aren't we teaching this as a model of early social progress? Is it because it came from Africa? Architecture and spiritual vision stone that SPAs stand before the pyramids of Giza and Urod. But stand before the pyramids of Meroë, and you feel something deeper, smaller. Yes, but steeper, sharper, more numerous. Over 200 pyramids, the desert tombs of kings, queens, nobles. Each one points toward the heavens like a spear of faith. Unlike Egyptian pyramids, hidden, labyrinthine, designed to deter thieves. Meroë's pyramids are open, visible, communal. Chapels sit directly in front. Altars face east. Offerings are left in plain sight. This wasn't secrecy. This was transparency. Death wasn't feared. It was celebrated. And the dead weren't isolated. They remained part of society. Asterisk, Dr. Robert Hoyland, professor of Arabic and Middle Eastern languages, observed asterisk, the Meroitic funerary cult suggests a belief in continuity between life and death, not escape from it. The ancestors were guardians, not ghosts. Compare that to Rome's obsession with imperium personal power, eternal glory, deified emperors. Kush didn't worship rulers. It honored them, then returned them to the earth. Even their gods were different. Yes, they kept Amen, but merged him with local deities like Apedmok, a lion-headed warrior god. Temples in Naka and Musa were wrought. Iza Phra depict Apedmok not just as protector, but as judge. And often he's shown receiving offerings from queens, not kings. Female divinity, female authority, divine balance. In Rome, women couldn't vote, hold office, or inherit equally. In Kush, queens ruled in their own right, issued decrees, commissioned buildings, led armies. The title Kandake wasn't queen mother or consort. It meant sovereign ruler, and they weren't anomalies. After Amanirenas, we have asterisk Amanishakato, whose tomb yielded a treasure trove of gold jewelry, now looted and displayed in Berlin's News Museum. Amanitore. Ruler with Natakamani, who rebuilt temples and expanded trade during a golden age of peace, Shanak Dakit. One of the earliest known ruling queens over 200 years before, Cleopatra let that marinate. Black African women leading empires. Centuries before Elizabeth I, centuries before Indira Gandhi. And yet, when we think of ancient queens, we say Cleopatra, Boudica, Zenobia, never Amanirenas, never Amanidor. Why? Because their power wasn't exotic to date. It wasn't sexualed. It wasn't framed as tragedy. It was simply normal. And that terrifies the old narrative. Because if African women ruled effectively, spiritually, militarily, then the entire colonial justification for domination collapses. Civilizing mission. To whom? The language Rome never deso to die. Now consider this. Rome left behind Latin, a language that shaped law, science, religion. But Kush left behind something rarer, asterisk the Meroitic language. Inscribed on temples, stele, and pottery, is still being deciphered. We can read the letters thanks to the work of scholars like Francis Griffith and Emmanuel. 4. But we don't fully understand the grammar or vocabulary. It's not Egyptian. It's not Arabic. It's not Semitic. Linguists believe it may be Afro-Asiatic, or even Nilo-Saharan, indigenous to Africa. And here's the kicker. It was used by both men and women. Inscriptions signed by priestesses, queens, artisans, not just kings. This wasn't a priestly code. It was a public language. Imagine if Rome had a script only half deciphered today. Would we still call it the cradle of Western literacy? Or would we say something powerful was lost here? Something deliberately ignored, because that's what's happening with Meroitic. Every untranslated inscription is a challenge to Eurocentric scholarship. Every unread stele whispers, you thought you knew history, barely scratched the surface, and while Rome burned books like the Sibylline oracles, kept under lock and key, Kush carved knowledge into stone, permanently, publicly, Fearlessly. So which civilization valued truth more? One that hoarded prophecy, or one that etched wisdom into mountains? Around 350 CE, the kingdom of Kush declined. The traditional story says Aksum invaded, Meroë burned. Civilization collapsed. But is that accurate? Recent excavations tell a different tale. Archaeologist Dr. Julie Anderson of the National Museum of Sudan says there's little evidence of widespread destruction at Meroë. No ash layers, no mass graves, no signs of sudden invasion. What we see is a gradual shift, urban centers decentralizing, populations moving south and west. Asterisk, in other words, not collapse. Transformation like Rome itself, which didn't fall in a day, but evolved into Byzantium, fragmented into kingdoms. Kush didn't vanish. It adapted. New states emerged. Alodia, Mokuria, Nobasha, Christian kingdoms that thrived for another 1,000 years along the Nile. And guess what? They resisted Islamic expansion for centuries. They traded with Constantinople. They sent ambassadors to Baghdad. One of them, Silko of Nobasha, erected a victory stele in Greek and Coptic, boasting of defeating desert raiders. Sound familiar? Another? African kingdom, writing its own history in multiple languages. But again, when do we learn about this? Ever. Instead, we're taught that Africa had no history until Europeans arrived. Asterisk, even Hegel wrote, Africa is no historical part of the world. It has no movement or development to exhibit. Asterisk A. Lie, a racist lie, built on ignorance and sustained by omission, because the truth is inconvenient. The truth is that Kush existed, flourished, and influenced world history while Rome was still building huts. The truth is that Kushite engineers smelted iron at industrial scales while Rome used bronze. The truth is that Kushite queens commanded armies while Roman women were confined to domus. And the truth is that Rome feared Kushite enough to negotiate peace, not impose it. So why call Rome great and silence Kush? Who profits from that lie? Asterisk, open a world history textbook, search Kush. What do you find? A paragraph? A map with vague borders? A caption? Successors to Egypt? A picture of a pyramid labeled smaller version of Giza? That's it. No mention of Meroitic writing, no discussion of iron furnaces, no acknowledgement of diplomatic parity with Rome. Even UNESCO's World Heritage listing for Meroë calls it a center of the kingdom of Kush, as if its significance ended with Egypt, but scholars are pushing back. In 2023, the University of Khartoum launched the Meroë Digital Archive project, digitizing thousands of inscriptions, artifacts, and excavation records, many damaged in recent conflicts. Dr. Hashim Ali, lead researcher, stated, "We are reconstructing a civilization that was systematically marginalized. Every fragment we recover is an act of reclamation." Meanwhile, Western museums hold looted Kushite treasures, gold crowns, statues, jewelry with minimal context. The Berlin gold crown of Amanishakato sits in glass, stripped of its meaning, its owner reduced to a Nubian queen. No mention of her military campaigns, no mention of her temple building, no mention of her legacy. Just a beautiful object. Divorced from history, is this preservation or possession? And why does it take African scholars risking their lives in war zones to tell their own story? Let's imagine a different history. One where school children learned that the first iron smelters were likely in Africa, that the first female heads of state ruled in Sudan, that Rome paid tribute to an African queen, that a black African empire preserved monotheism while Europe worshipped idols. Would our view of civilization change? Would we still believe that progress flows only from Athens to Rome to London? Or would we finally admit that greatness has always worn many faces? Anthropologist Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop argued for decades the cultural unity of Africa from antiquity to today is undeniable. Kush, Egypt, Ethiopia, they are not exceptions. They are the rule. Asterisk, and he was right. Kush wasn't an outlier. It was part of a continuum, a network of African states that innovated, governed, endured. So when we say Kush was greater than Rome, we're not saying Rome was weak. We're saying Africa was strong and has been written out of its own story. We're saying that gold, steel, wisdom, and sovereignty didn't wait for Europe to discover them. They were here. They were African. They were real. And no amount of erasure can undo that. Asterisk. So let's end not with answers, but with questions. Questions that should keep you awake tonight. If Kush had survived another 500 years, would Christianity have taken a different path? If Meroitic script had spread across Africa, would we have a Pan-African literary tradition older than Arabic? If European historians had respected Kush, would colonialism have been possible? And if children in America, Europe, Asia learned about Amanirenas instead of Cleopatra, how would that change how we see power, race, and leadership? We may never know, but we can choose to remember. To visit the pyramids of Meroë not as curiosities, but as monuments to a forgotten greatness. To demand that museums return looted artifacts to teach our children that civilization didn't start in Rome. It started along the Nile, and it was black, and it was brilliant, and it was greater because greatness isn't measured by conquest alone. It's measured by resilience, by innovation, by justice, by the courage to rise again. And again, after the world tries to bury you, Kush did all that in Rome. Rome is ruins, but Kush is rising. Asterisk, if this video shook your understanding of history. Good, because the truth should unsettle. Join us on Patreon to support independent historical research that challenges the status quo. We fund excavations, translate ancient texts, and amplify African voices in archaeology. Your support helps rewrite history, not to erase Rome, but to restore balance. And if you're ready for more, hit subscribe. Next week, they called it Primitive, the Lost Cities of the Congo Empire, because the lies run deep and we're just getting started. Asterisk.